In a world shaken by tariffs and trade wars, a storm brews at the BRICS Summit, the question is not just about economics, it is about sovereignty, strength, and the future of global power. Today, India has raised its voice, warning Trump and asking, how will BRICS respond? India has made it clear nations cannot be bullied into submission. Tariffs may shake markets, but they cannot break the spirit of a united front. At the BRICS Summit, India's warning to Trump was more than just a diplomatic statement. It was a declaration of resilience, a bold reminder that the world is no longer willing to accept one-sided economic dominance. For years, smaller economies and even powerful developing nations have lived under the shadow of Western pressure, forced to bend their policies, their trade, and sometimes even their sovereignty to avoid confrontation. But in this new era, India is saying, enough is enough. The tariffs imposed by the United States are meant to wound, to push economies into a corner, to remind nations of where power supposedly lies. Yet what America's leadership underestimates is the rising strength of countries like India, nations that have endured centuries of struggle, that have built themselves up from poverty and colonial exploitation, that know what it means to stand tall when the odds are stacked against them. A tariff may affect the price of steel, oil, or technology. It may disrupt trade flows for a time, but it cannot destroy the will of a nation to fight for its place in the world order. India's warning at BRICS was not just about numbers and trade deficits. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to allow another country to dictate the terms of growth. It was about saying to the United States and to the world that economic warfare is not a game America can win unchallenged. India has positioned itself as a voice for the global South, a defender of fair trade, and a nation unwilling to be treated as expendable in someone else's political strategy. And this message does not stand alone. When India speaks at BRICS, it speaks with the quiet backing of allies who share the same pain and the same determination. Russia knows what it is like to face sanctions. China has already been at the receiving end of America's trade hostility. Brazil and South Africa, too, have seen the effects of global inequalities. Together, this bloc carries more than half the world's population and a growing share of the global economy. With such weight behind its words, India's warning is not an empty threat. It is a rallying cry. Trump's tariffs might have been designed to weaken, but in reality, they are strengthening the bonds of unity between nations that once worked in parallel, but are now moving in lockstep. India is using this moment to say that the old order of submission is dead. It is telling the world that being targeted will not lead to fear. It will lead to resolve. The warning is clear. If America believes tariffs will isolate its rivals, it is mistaken. Instead, tariffs will push them together, forging alliances that are stronger, louder, and unafraid to challenge the so-called superpower. India's voice is not trembling. It is rising, echoing across BRICS, reminding Trump and the world that no nation can be bullied forever. This is the age of resistance, and India has just announced it is ready to lead. With Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, and India standing together, the world sees more than just an alliance. It sees a counterweight to Western dominance, a new force ready to challenge unfair trade practices. The BRICS bloc, once underestimated as a loose coalition of developing economies, is now transforming into a symbol of balance in a world too long tilted toward one side. At this moment of rising tensions, the strength of BRICS is not only measured in GDP or military capacity, but in its ability to represent billions of people whose voices have often been silenced in global decision-making. When India raised its warning against Trump's tariffs, it was not standing alone. Behind it stood China with its unmatched industrial might, Russia with its energy dominance and strategic influence, Brazil with its agricultural power, and South Africa with its role as a gateway to the African continent. Together, these 5 nations represent not just economic powerhouses, but a vision of multipolarity, a world where no single nation can dictate the rules of trade and governance. The power of BRICS lies not only in numbers, but in the idea that fairness must replace exploitation and cooperation must replace coercion. For decades, the United States and its allies have set the global economic agenda, writing rules that often benefited themselves at the expense of others. Institutions created after World War II were designed to keep the balance of power in Western hands. But the rise of BRICS signals a profound shift. This bloc does not merely seek to participate in existing systems, it seeks to reshape them. The call for new financial institutions, such as the new development bank and the push for trade in local currencies rather than the dollar, are proof that BRICS is carving out its own path. This is no longer a world where the West holds a monopoly on power. Trump's tariffs, while intended to intimidate, may ironically accelerate the shift. Every time the U.S. uses economic pressure as a weapon, it drives nations closer together. BRICS, once seen as a group with differing interests, now finds unity in shared struggle. India's warning to Trump gains weight precisely because it is amplified by the presence of Russia and China, nations that have both clashed with Washington directly. Brazil and South Africa, though geographically distant, understand the implications of a world where tariffs and sanctions are tools of dominance. They know that if one falls, others will follow. This unity transforms BRICS into more than an economic alliance. It becomes a shield, a platform where developing nations can stand tall without fear of isolation. The power of BRICS lies in its diversity. 5 nations from different continents, cultures, and histories, yet bound by a single mission to break free from economic intimidation and to build a more equal world order. And this is what the world is now beginning to see. The image of BRICS standing together at the summit is not just symbolic, it is historic. It sends a message that when the powerful attempt to dominate through tariffs and threats, there will be resistance. It shows that unity is the greatest weapon and that together, these nations can tilt the balance of the future. With Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, and India standing together, the world sees more than just an alliance. It sees the rise of a counterweight to Western dominance. For years, global trade and finance have been shaped by the rules and priorities of a few powerful nations. But BRICS represents a different vision. One where billions of people spread across diverse continents demand fairness, equality, and respect on the global stage. The unity of BRICS is no longer a theoretical idea. It is becoming a living reality, forged in the fires of trade wars, sanctions, and economic intimidation. When these 5 nations gather, the message is not only about cooperation. It is about transformation. Russia brings energy resources and military influence. China brings industrial strength and unmatched manufacturing capacity. Brazil contributes vast agricultural wealth. South Africa serves as a vital link to Africa. And India stands as a rising giant of technology, innovation, and population power. Separately, these nations are strong. Together, they form an economic and political force that cannot be ignored. At the BRICS Summit, the power of this union was felt more sharply than ever before. It was not a defensive gathering, but a declaration that the balance of global power is shifting. U.S. tariffs, which were meant to weaken, have inadvertently strengthened this coalition. By targeting China and pressuring India, Washington has pushed these nations closer to one another. What once may have been economic competition within BRICS is now replaced by strategic unity. They understand that survival and growth depend on cooperation. In this context, India's warning to Trump was more than rhetoric. It was the voice of an entire bloc, magnified by shared determination. This power of BRICS is not only measured in numbers, but also in vision. These nations are building alternatives to Western-dominated institutions. The new development bank, created as a rival to the World Bank and IMF, is already funding projects that prioritize growth without political strings attached. The push to trade in local currencies instead of the US dollar is another step toward independence. Each of these actions chips away at the monopoly once held by the West, proving that the future of trade will no longer be dictated by a single capital. Critics once dismissed BRICS as too diverse, too scattered, and too divided to matter. But diversity has become its strength. 5 nations from different continents, with different histories and different challenges, are proving that common goals can unite even the most unlikely partners. What they share is a refusal to be subdued, a determination to write their own story rather than live under the shadow of another's power. The world is watching. The rise of BRICS is not just a story of economics. It is a story of resistance, dignity, and ambition. It is a promise that the future will not belong to one nation, but to all who are willing to stand together. And as this summit shows, BRICS is ready to stand, ready to lead, and ready to challenge any force that seeks to dominate unfairly. The U.S. may believe tariffs are a weapon, but for BRICS, they are fuel to build alternative trade routes, strengthen partnerships, and push back against economic intimidation. What America considers a tool of pressure has become the very spark of unity among nations that refuse to bow down. Trump's tariffs may have been designed to cripple economies, to weaken industries, and to create dependence on the U.S., but instead, they have awakened a determination that is far more powerful than any single sanction or duty. Every tariff tells a story. When Washington raises duties on steel, it is not just targeting an industry, it is trying to bend the will of nations like India and China. When it squeezes imports of technology, it is not only about competition, it is about control. But BRICS nations understand this game, and they are refusing to play by those rules. India's voice at the BRICS Summit makes it clear. Tariffs will not be the chains that hold nations hostage. Instead, they will become the fire that forges stronger alliances. China, long a primary target of U.S. tariffs, has already shown the world how to adapt. By diversifying its supply chains, investing in new markets, and strengthening trade within Asia, Beijing has demonstrated resilience. Russia, under heavy Western sanctions, has turned to BRICS partners for support, building new energy pipelines and redirecting exports. Brazil and South Africa, though less directly targeted, understand that today's tariffs on one partner may tomorrow become barriers against their own growth. For them, standing with BRICS is not just solidarity, it is survival. India's warning to Trump carries the weight of this shared experience. Tariffs are not seen as economic policies, they are seen as weapons of war. And just like in any war, resistance creates innovation. Already, BRICS is discussing mechanisms to bypass U.S.-controlled financial systems, trading in local currencies, and using their own institutions like the New Development Bank to reduce reliance on the West. What was once seen as impossible is now becoming urgent and achievable. For decades, the U.S. dollar has dominated global trade. Tariffs were one way to protect that dominance, ensuring that other nations had little choice but to comply. But with BRICS turning tariffs into motivation, the very foundation of that system is beginning to shake. The more Washington presses, the more determined BRICS becomes to break free. This is the unintended consequence of economic warfare. It forces the opponent to grow stronger. The world is watching, and the message is clear. Tariffs may close one door, but they open many others. They force nations to find new friends, new systems, and new strengths. For BRICS, Trump's tariffs are no longer a threat. They are an opportunity. An opportunity to rise above dependence, to unite against pressure, and to prove that no single nation can control the future of trade. This is why India's words ring so loudly. America's weapon has backfired. What was meant to divide has instead united. What was meant to weaken has instead strengthened. And now, BRICS is more determined than ever to push forward together into a future that no tariff can block. Russia and China, pillars of this bloc, are determined to stand shoulder to shoulder with India. Their message is simple. A new order is rising, one that no single nation can dictate. When these two giants take their place alongside India at the BRICS Summit, the weight of their presence changes everything. For the United States, tariffs may be an economic weapon, but for Russia and China, they are a reminder of why unity is necessary. Together, they signal to the world that attempts at economic intimidation will be met with resilience and retaliation, not surrender. Russia's role in this struggle is shaped by years of experience under sanctions. For more than a decade, it has faced some of the harshest restrictions imposed by the West, designed to isolate its economy and weaken its influence. Yet instead of collapse, Russia has adapted. It has turned eastward, strengthening trade with China, India, and other partners. It has developed domestic industries, expanded energy exports to non-Western markets, and invested in self-reliance. In the process, Moscow has become a symbol of endurance, showing BRICS that economic warfare can be resisted and even turned into opportunity. So, China, on the other hand, is the engine of BRICS. Its vast manufacturing base, technological advancements, and role as the world's largest trading nation make it a target for U.S. tariffs. But rather than weaken, Beijing has accelerated its push for alternatives, building the Belt and Road Initiative, investing in regional partnerships, and championing trade conducted outside the dollar system. With every tariff imposed by Washington, China finds new reasons to deepen its ties with BRICS partners. This is why its alignment with India at the summit carries such importance. Though historically rivals in some arenas, the shared threat of U.S. economic pressure has given both nations a reason to cooperate more closely. Together, Russia and China form the backbone of BRICS. Russia provides energy, defense cooperation, and raw resources. China provides markets, industry, and financial muscle. And when India joins forces with them, the message becomes undeniable. BRICS is not just an economic grouping. It is a geopolitical force. At the summit, their combined presence amplified India's warning to Trump. It was no longer a lone nation speaking out. It was three global powers, united, telling the world that America's grip on the global economy is slipping. For the United States, this is the challenge. Russia and China are not isolated players. They are building networks of influence that stretch far beyond BRICS. By linking with Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, they are reshaping trade patterns and reducing dependency on Western markets. Their cooperation with India only accelerates this shift. What was once seen as a fragmented group of nations is now becoming a strategic coalition with the capacity to rival U.S. influence on every continent. The rise of Russia and China within BRICS is not about replacing one empire with another. It is about building a system where no single power can dictate terms. It is about balance, fairness, and shared strength. Their presence at the summit made one thing clear: the old order is breaking. And as India, Russia, and China stand together, they light the path toward a world where tariffs and sanctions will no longer be tools of domination, but relics of a fading era. This is not the end, but the beginning. BRICS is not just reacting, it's rewriting the rules. The trade war may have been sparked by Washington, but the fire of resistance is spreading across the globe. What Trump began as an attempt to pressure rivals has evolved into something far greater, a movement to challenge the very foundations of the global economic order. The future of trade will not be decided in Washington alone. It will be forged in summits like BRICS, where nations gather not to submit, but to rise. The lesson of this trade war is simple. Coercion breeds defiance. When the United States imposed tariffs, it expected silence. Instead, it ignited debate, strategy, and unity among those who were once on the defensive. India's warning to Trump was not an isolated outburst. It was the voice of a world ready to push back. The future will not be about one nation's dominance. It will be about many nations refusing to be dictated to. BRICS is already laying the foundation for that future. By investing in institutions like the new development bank, they are proving they do not need Western lenders to fuel growth. By encouraging trade in local currencies, they are showing that the dollar's monopoly is not eternal. By strengthening partnerships across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they are building a new web of cooperation that no tariff can cut through. Every move they make chips away at the system that once seemed unshakable. The trade war may escalate, and the U.S. may continue to apply pressure, but the future no longer belongs to unilateral power. Each tariff imposed by Washington pushes BRICS nations closer to one another, and each act of economic aggression makes their determination stronger. It is as if the very weapon meant to break them is forging their unity. That is the paradox America did not foresee. The more it pushes, the more resilient its rivals become. This future is not without struggle. The path ahead will be marked by confrontation, negotiations, and shifting alliances. But unlike before, developing nations are no longer standing as silent observers. They are participants, leaders, and architects of a new system. The trade war is not just a clash of numbers. It is a battle of principles. It asks, will the world remain bound by the rules of a single superpower, or will it embrace a system where every nation has a voice? BRICS has already chosen its answer. The summit's closing message was clear. No tariff, no threat, no act of intimidation can silence a coalition that represents billions of people and a growing share of global power. The trade war, instead of weakening BRICS, is setting the stage for its rise. The future will remember this moment not as a crisis, but as a turning point. What began as a tariff dispute has become a declaration of independence. And as the fire of resistance spreads, BRICS is prepared to shape tomorrow's world, a world where fairness replaces fear and where unity defeats intimidation. The summit has spoken. BRICS is not afraid. Together, they send a message. No tariff, no threat, no power can silence nations that refuse to bow.